Good morning and welcome to the Connectit 365 training session for our Q1 release of 2025. Of course, this session we will discuss Connectit, focusing mostly on the new features for this release and taking a look at how Connectit currently looks. As mentioned with the previous session as well, please keep in mind to test our products before deploying them in a live environment. So please use something like a test environment, a sandbox, or something, especially if you have integrated software or customizations, especially with an app like Connectit, where you can create your own custom definitions. It's good to be aware that you test the functionality properly before changing it in the live environment. Today we will be discussing the newest release. That's from the Q1 release that's available for BC 18 and up. And let's dive into the features. So for this release, we had several features implemented, some focusing on the setup. We will process these features within their categories. So we have the setup, we have some that's are changed for both import and export definitions. We have some that are exclusively for exports, and we have some exclusively for imports. And as always, we also specify any additional function changes as well. For now, we will start with the setup. In the setup wizard, there are two changes in total. One of those is that you can now request a trial key directly from the setup wizard. Previously, we had the option that if you downloaded Connectit from app stores in a cloud environment, and that you would get the trial key by email. And while that could work, we have now integrated it so you can request it directly from the app itself, and which can also help if you've lost the trial key, so you can enter it again by requesting it again. Please note that you can only request a trial key once per environment. Yeah, if you request it again, the service will try to find the existing trial key, and if it's still valid, it will automatically use that. So for this session, we will go back and forth between the presentation and Business Central. So I can show the features. So here we have a Business Central environment in a container on Business Central 25 with the latest version of Connectit installed. And as you can see, for demo sessions, we always use the Connectit Manager to show all the menus that are available. So let's start with the setup wizard. Here we currently already have a key available, so we can't request the trial key because we already have a production key. However, if we don't have a key available, we can request it. The first time that you request it, you'll get a contact information page to give your contact details. So let's change some information. And we directly have a trial key available. Now, if I were to remove this trial key, and I do it again, instead of getting the contact information page, I will get the previous trial key. So we can register if a trial key is already registered. So if you want to configure another company, then we can easily assign that trial key once again. Please keep in mind, if the trial key is expired, it will still find the trial key, but of course it will be invalid at the time. And normally our trial keys are available for 14 days for most products. Of course, if there are any questions regarding a trial, you can always contact our sales department at sales@idyn.nl. The rest of the setup wizard is the same. We will handle one additional change, however, later on. Let's just go through the wizard because it's only a few steps. After the license key, we normally ask for which version of the Connectit API you want to use. Standard is the cloud version. However, you can also use the self-hosted version. With every Connectit release, we also provide the files for a self-hosted version for our Connectit API in the on-premise downloads. So that's always available, and that's something that you can deploy either as an Azure web app like we have, or on a local IIS server if you have a completely local environment, for instance. In this case, we have a self-hosted version as well. That's our test environment for the Connectit API. However, it's identical to the actual cloud version, which is the production version. So the reasons for using a self-hosted API could be that you want to make sure that all data is only transferred between your own services, or for instance, if you have services like an FTP server available that are not available outside of your own local network. So in that case, you might need a local API as well that can interact with that FTP server. I do see the question that if this session will be recorded, and yes, this session will be recorded, and it's available later on as well, so you can re-watch it later. Back to this setup wizard. The next option is the mapping helper that we have available. We have some functionality with creating definition lines from example files, something that we will discuss shortly as well, because there's a change for that in this version as well. And in that mapping helper, we allow the automatic mapping of tables and fields based on the element names in the XML and JSON files, if those are similar to the table names or field names or captions, then we will try to automatically assign it. Then we have the job queue entries. Connectit uses 2 job queue entries with the same code unit, one for the imports, one for the exports. If for the imports and for the export actually as well, we will check all import or export definitions if they are allowed to run based on the settings on that definition. And that's something that we can of course see later as well on the export and import definition card, where we can specify the actual interval for the execution of the definitions. And the frequency of the job queue entries determine how frequently those recurrent settings on the definitions are checked, if the definitions are allowed to run. And then we have the last step already. And this is actually where we also have a change available. So we always have example definitions available that we can download, that we have publicly available. So you can check those out as well. Previously, those example definitions were kind of flat, mostly having only 1 or 2 tables with not a lot of functions. And since Connectit has been the functionality has been expanded over the last years. We've updated those definitions as well. I won't select these for now because I already have the definitions available in this environment. However, you can select these at any time. You can go back to the wizard and select them once again. So if you decide to later on still include the example definitions, then you can go back and select a different option. And those example definitions can be found in the separate menu. So we have our regular definitions and we have our example definitions. Please note that this is simply a field on the definition header called example. So if we check these, then we see that we have a list available over here. If we check the first, for instance, then we see that we have the option example enabled. If you want to make use of these example definitions, you can, of course, change these. Currently, when example is enabled, these definitions won't count against your license, since the license normally counts the amount of definitions that are configured within your environment. These won't count against your license, but they can also not be scheduled with the job queue entries. But of course, if you want to use them, simply disable example, and from there you can use them. You can, however, still use them to manually import or export data, so you can try them out when they are still configured as an example. So here we can actually see that we have a definition with a purchase header, with a tracking specification, and we also have specified some rules for how to handle the new record or if the record exists, and we have some functions as well that we use. For instance, our standard function get field value is included over here. So hopefully these examples are a little bit more related to real life examples, so you can see how you can use Connectit in real life scenarios. So here, of course, we have a order import, which is and sales order import in this case, where we've linked several fields and several validations using external identifier. I will go over all the options that we normally have within the definition lines later on, so we can make clear what is what exactly. And here we also have some examples available with some different methods as well, like an import for bol.com orders and for Zalando, for instance. Please keep in mind that with these different methods, we never provide passwords or tokens or secrets within the definition itself. So that's something that you might need to change yourself if you want to actually use the method like the REST, for instance. This is the generic demo API for bol.com, which uses OAuth2. But of course, the OAuth2 secret, the client ID and secret will be different for your own environment. If you want to just test them out with the definition line structure without the actual method, we can also switch them to manually to import a file instead. And what we also have here, for instance, is an example with a template. Of course, if you don't have the template available in your environment, you might need to change that up as well before trying it out. So here you can see that we have FTP selected as well with some example values. Once again, the password won't be filled in when you download these, so you need to provide those yourself or change the whole FTP server yourself. But this, for example, as the configuration template that is used based on the customer. And lastly, over here, what we also have is an intercompany example that's actually based on the example definition in the export, where we have a list as well. So you can see that we have an intercompany example as well, where we provide the items with the item vendor table with some functions linked to it, and an output condition in this case as well, and it's linked to, in this case, the same company, because we only have one company in this environment, linked to that import definition that we just saw that was available, which currently isn't active. But once again, you can change it up. So this will probably help you, hopefully help you, to get a feel of what is possible with Connectit. To go back to this example, actually, here we have an example with an output condition where we can see that we only want to export this if the temporary value for the vendor item number is not empty. And that is something that is set probably over here or on the check vendor item. So here it is. So what this means is we will only export items if we find a related item vendor. And I believe it might be cleared right before it. Yeah, it is cleared here. So for every new item record, we will clear that variable and only set it when we process the item vendor record that is it to that item. A couple of other examples that we have over here. So for instance, we have a CSV and an Excel example, but we also have an EDI order in XML format, for instance, that can be used as an example, since we regularly get some questions if we, for instance, support EDI formats standards. So here you can see an example how this can be used. So that's actually this part. So in the last step of this wizard, you can choose to install example definitions. You can choose to only do import or export or both or none, just how you like it. Next up, we have an improvement for both export and import definitions. As mentioned before, we have a create definition lines wizard that allows you to retrieve or use an example file to generate the definition lines, which allows to speed up the process of creating definitions without having to enter every definition line manually and having to decide what kind of indenting should be used. We can use this to have a rough outline to create the definition and go from there, but that allows us also to create the most basic definition in in 5 to 15 minutes and go from there. And at that point, we only really need to link the data items with the key fields. So set the table relations and check some fields, of course, if they can be found automatically with the mapping helper. So if we take a look at that create definition lines wizard was already in Connectit. However, we made a couple of changes to it. Previously, if you press the cancel button, it would only ignore the current node that you were working on, but still continue with the rest of the process. That's now changed to cancel the complete process. And we now also have a back or previous action as well. If you had, if there was an error, or if you want to make double check what you entered in the previous step, then you can go back as well easily without starting a complete process over. So first of all, if we start to create definition lines wizard process, if there are already lines available, then we will get a confirmation message. If we want to delete the current lines, because we don't add to the current lines, we will overwrite them. So in this case, we will proceed. If there's nothing yet, of course, then it will not give that confirmation message. Here we select the definition file. Since it's a JSON export definition, it will ask for a file with a JSON format. So for instance, let's choose the sales order. Here, as before, we can decide for each node in the message that it will go through if the element should be a data item. If we don't select the data item, we'll choose, it will create a helper for it instead. In the case of a JSON, the first node will always be the root node, even though it doesn't have an element name. It will display root. And here we can decide if we want to link a table. If I actually open this here, then we can see what kind of file it is. So here we can see that this is the root node. And from there we have the shipping address and the products. So those will be the nodes that we go through. And in this case, it makes sense then to assign a data item to the root and set that to the sales header. Of course, as always, we can select it from over here, or you can type the number of the table manually if you know it. And as you can see, the cancel import button was already there, but right now it actually also canceled it with the message that it is canceled. Once again, however, we now also have the previous button as well. That allows us to process this to go back to the previous node if there is a previous node. In this case, I will complete the wizard in this case, so we have a output for the definition. So in this case, the root will be linked to the sales header table. Then the next node is the shipping address. In this case, I don't want to link any data to it, so that will be a helper. And we have the products, and in this case, it would make sense that we link that to the sales line. In this case, we finished creating the definition lines. As you can see, we have contents for our lines. And here you can see we selected the sales area, so that will be a data item. We have a helper for the shipping address, meaning that all fields below this helper will still link to the sales header. And below that, we have the products, and that will link to the sales line. Once again, a data item. As you can see, some of the fields are already mapped. Of course, we need to check if those are correct. But here you can see, based on the element name, that Connectit found the order date and the status and the currency code, and the same for the lines as well. So what we need to do to complete this is to check if we need to map other fields as well. So we might, for instance, want to set the order ID to an external document number. Let's see, for instance, it would make sense for the line ID to get linked to the line number and either the product ID or the this one to the actual item number. And of course, so this way we can go through it. One thing that we want to do as well is link our data items together. So that's something that isn't done currently. So we want to add the document type. We don't want that in the output. And we do the same for the document number so that we can link the sales lines only based on document type and document number and only get the correct sales lines. So with this, of course, we need to make sure that we have everything correct in this definition, but we have a rough start where we can easily check if the structure is okay, and we can combine that as well with the create example export, for instance. For now, I will also add a filter to make sure that we only process orders. So in that case, we can set the filter text to 1 or order. In this case, actually, we can also select it. And we have an example available. Of course, a lot of fields that aren't linked but still set to fields. So that's why you get this value over here. So those need to be either set to constant to get an empty value or specified link to a map to a field. But here, from here, we can see what we can expect and if it lines up with the example. As mentioned, the create definition lines wizard is changed for both import and export. So these new features with actually canceling the whole process and going back to the previous node is available for both import and export definitions. Next, we have pre-processing values. So we have added some functionality to specify temporary values, but in a way that you can specify them right before we execute the import or export. And the reason for this is because sometimes we need something that's not related to the amount of records that we want to process, but only want to specify it once, maybe with a function like a number series function, so we can generate a number series once. Example for this is, for instance, an import on journal lines, where we might want to specify the document number, but we only want to generate a number series value for that once at the start of the import, instead of generated once per record. So what we can do over there is, if we go back actually to, in this case, the export, you will see that we have an option available. Maybe actually go back to this one, where you can see that in the lines we have the option, the menu option to specify pre-processing values. So this is a list of temporary values, the values that you would normally set with the setTempFal function or setTemporaryValue. However, instead of specifying the setTempFal function, you can simply select one or create one over here. And you can specify either a constant value or functions or both. So if we have an export, for instance, where we only want to specify a number series once, regardless of how many records we export, we could do something like this. Where we select the functions. Of course, we can also and then specify something like this. And in that case, what Connectit will do is process these values, and determine if there are functions to process as well. And after that is processed, save them with these temporary value codes. So those can be reused in the export or import definition. And in this case, that will allow us to generate the document number once based on the number series and set a first date, maybe to filter, for instance, regardless of how many sales order records we export. In this case, we don't have the array, so it will always be one. But for instance, if we want to generate it for once, but use it in all sales lines, that's also a scenario where we can use it. And as mentioned before, of course, on the import side, it would make sense to use it, for instance, in the journals where you can specify a document number, but the regular logic for Business Central is to reuse the document number if you have open journal lines. So, for instance, if we want to process something in the item journal, then we want to use the item journal line. And normally that's a really flat import, since we only process the line records. And here, for instance, we have the document number, and document number normally isn't generated from the table, but from the pages, which means that from Connectit, if we do an import, we don't know. We can't use that logic with the onValidate trigger because that's not behind the table, but behind the page. So in that case, we can use the pre-processing values. And once again, for instance, use the number series to specify a value. In the import, you see that we have actually two options. We can either select import or processing. Since we can use pre-processing values on the initial import when we try to retrieve the data from the external service, and when we and that will result in an import entry. and we can use it for processing. So when we have the import entry and process the data from the import entry into the actual tables. In this case, it would make sense to set it to processing, which is also the default, because we want to use this temporary value in the actual processing. So in that case, we would use the document number and we fill it in like this. And in that case, regardless of how many item journal lines we have to process, we will always keep the same document number for this whole import. Only if we start a new import, then we will retrieve a new value from the number series function to retrieve a new document number. Then we have the system links with the links and notes that are available. So those are the standard Business Central system fact boxes. Those are now also added to the import definitions, the export definitions, and the projects. So we already saw them previously. I believe one of those on the export side is filled in. So here we can see them. They are both available in the list page and also on the card page. So here, for instance, if you want to have more details stored with your definitions, for instance, a link to how to use it, or some description for it for colleagues, for instance, how to use it, or what the functionality behind this is, maybe a link to a help page, then you can add those in the definition itself. So you can easily see, and of course we can easily add new notes as well. Well, as mentioned, we have those on the export definitions. We already saw them right before on the import definitions as well. And we've also added them to the projects. So the projects are the entities where we can link to multiple import definitions and export definitions to easily manage those definitions. From here, we can also use the backup options, for instance, to export the complete project, including all definitions. But here, of course, we can also add notes and links to it for easier management. And that will be visible for all users that look at this project. Next up, we have new fields for SOAP imports and exports. This was already available for REST imports and exports, or exports in that case. But in the case of SOAP, we always do a post request with a content, with a request body. So we need a content type both ways. Previously, we only allowed for the standard application/XML or text/XML that was hard-coded for SOAP. Right now, we have added that field on the import and export definitions, so we can specify the content type as well. If we go and check that in the export definition, in this case, I have an example for SOAP. And you can see that we have the content type available. Please note, this is a free text field. because sometimes we see non-standard content types that are used. I believe with the bol.com API, for instance, I believe they have that included in accept header instead of the content type. They've used that to specify their API version, for instance, that you want to call. So this is a free text field. It will be filled in with the standard application/XML, but you can change it however you want. So, for instance, if you're the SOAP service that you're sending the request to only accepts text/XML, then simply change it over here. Next up, we have something that's only for the export side, and that's an improvement on the XML exports, where we now allow for data items or XML node lists with only one value directly in the node list instead of having to use an additional object to include it in. That's also still possible, of course, but if we use the definition lines in a certain way, where we leave the tag name blank for the data item, then we can create a single value node list instead. So the example that you see over here is based on the customers. Previously, on the left side, we always had the export where the data item would always generate an XML node, and the elements below that within that node. So we had a customer node within with a number element within it. However, now if we leave the customer node or the tag name for the customer data item blank, we can create a node list with only the fields below it directly linked to it. So on the right hand side, you see the example where we only have the customer number as an element field as part of a node list. And that example is also available over here. Might want to do this for now. So here we have that same example for the customer. So if normally we would have something like this with the tag name filled in, and with an array, I need to make sure that this is actually not specified, and that's fine. So we would get the customer XML node for each customer record. So if I export this, we see that customer node for each customer record, in this case where you have 3 records in our filter, set. So we have those 3 customer nodes within the customers node. If you now change this, leave the tag name for the data item blank. And in this case, it's also good to know that the name is not included in the output, so we only get the number back. We get the direct results with only the numbers as part of an XML node list, and that's something that sometimes is requested in XML, where we simply have a list with the same elements or recurring elements instead. So that's the way that we can export that part. And this is similar to how we do it for the JSON value arrays. And the big difference is that for JSON value arrays, we leave the actual fields or the child elements blank. to add that as part of the value array, but for XML, it makes more sense in our structure to leave the tag name blank to get this result. Please note that we do, for this to work, you need to leave the tag name blank and specify the array, because this is only usable for XML node list. If you don't specify the array, it will not be allowed to leave the tag name blank. Then we have an important change on the imports. So for imports, we determine if a record that we want to import is a new record or an existing record. To do that, we check a couple of things. So we have our external identifier that we can use to check against the imported records. If we had that external identifier previously, if we don't use an external identifier or the external identifier is not found, we will use the primary key field for that record. In this example, for instance, you see the purchase header. As an example, the purchase header has the document type and the document number as primary key fields. And for each primary key fields, we will check a couple of things. First of all, we check if we already know the value from a parent record. In this example, purchase header would not have a parent record, but once we process the purchase line, it would make sense if we have key links between the purchase header and the purchase line. So we don't need to specify once again what the document type and the document number are, because we already know that from the parent record, in this case, the purchase header. Next up, we check the definition lines. So that's the, let's go back actually to the Business Central environment. And yeah, so here we check the definition lines for the primary key fields. In this case, for purchase header, there are no primary key fields available in this section in the definition lines, because both of the primary key fields are set to the constant fields. Now the big change is how we handle those constant values, because that's the last part that we check. Previously, we checked for constant values, but only constant values without a function, so only with actual constant values. So we would check for the document type. For the purchase header, we don't have a parent record to check against. We don't have them specified in the definition lines. However, we have it specified in the constant values. So we'll check that and see that we will find the constant value 1 or the value order. However, the second primary key previously was not found because we used functions. So that was excluded from the list, because initially when we set up Connectit, the idea was that constant values with functions would always result in new values. And that might still be the case. For instance, if we use the number series, that would normally generate an order number that was not used before. However, there are some functions as well that have some different behavior, like the line function, for instance, that can generate a number that already exists in the Business Central database. In that case, previously, this would be skipped. So in the check for the existing records, we would not find fields, a document or a number for the purchase header, and we would always go for the new record action, which in this case would be to create the new record. In a lot of cases, that's fine. For instance, if we check here, this is probably the number series. Yeah, we do use the number series, and after that, we use the temporary value to set the value. But this part is not important. This doesn't change anything for the value, but we would generate a purchase order number. As said, that would normally create a new purchase order header. So that's fine. We can use create. The chance that for some reason already exists is very unlikely. However, it could still happen. And in that case, we would continue our process as if we were to process new records, only to find out once we insert that record that the record already exists. So in this example, for instance, if we go to the purchase line and we use the line number function in the constant values, in this case it's not specified here, but it's over here. But let's say if we change it up a bit and set it here, with the line number function with an increment of 10,000, then it could be that this line number is already in use for that same purchase order. However, we don't know because the line number simply generates the line number based on the incoming lines to process. So if we have 5 purchase lines to process in a file or in a message, then that would count from 1 to 5, and then with the increment of 10,000, of course, would generate 10,000 to 50,000. But it could be that that line number already exists in the database that's already been used. For instance, if we have an existing purchase order that we want to update, and we want to possibly update the lines as well. The result was that it previously resulted in an error, either with the error that the record already exists, or with a SQL error with an error code that points to a primary key violation. Now the change is simply that now with the check for the existing records, we also include these constant values with the functions, which sounds easy, and hopefully its usage is. However, that has quite a lot of impact on the technical side. We now include that as well. So for instance, if we have that line number and we find line number 10,000 and we already have that in use, we will find that first and we'll make sure that we know, oh, that's already in use, and we can go to the record exist action instead of creating a new record with the same primary key values. Hopefully that will prevent a lot of, if not all, primary key violations that could occur, and instead update records when needed. Of course, you can still use the external identifier as well. That will always be the first part that will be checked before we even go to the primary key fields to make sure if we can find it. And that's something that can also be found, of course, in the imported records here to see if we have any existing imported records with that same external identifier. And that can, of course, can also be used for each data item. So not only for the purchase header, but we could also specify it on the line as well. Then another change on the import side is that we now have an option to process an import definition with the job queue entry that's set as a response definition. So while this is a change that belongs to the import definitions, technically the option is configured on the export definition. Because on the export definition, if we choose REST or SOAP as methods, we can select a response definition to process the response with. Previously, in previous versions, this would be processed directly. So we would do an export to the REST or SOAP service or API. And we get a response back. That response is processed as an import definition. If we specify a response definition, we don't have to process it. But once we specify a response definition, it will create an import entry. And that was executed directly with a background task. Now that will still be the default way. to process these import definitions. However, you can now also select if you want to process the import definition with the job queue entry, meaning that for the export to the REST API or the SOAP web service, that will still be processed, and we will still get a response back, and we will still create the import entry. But from there, we leave it as is and leave it to the job queue entry to actually process the import, meaning that the imports will be processed, will not be processed simultaneously, which could result into some locking issues if you have a lot of outgoing requests to REST or SOAP services. So if we check that over here, we go to the exports. We can probably see it over here for SOAP. In this case, it's not configured over here, but here we can set the response definition, and we can select if we want to process with the job queue entry. It's probably also set over here with REST. Yeah. So here we have an example with REST. Once again, we have a response definition. So if we do an export with this definition to the REST API, then we would process the response with this response definition, this import definition, and we select that the import definition should be processed with the job queue entry. Please do keep in mind that for this, we do need to make sure that import is set to recurrence, to use the recurrence to make sure that it gets picked up by the job queue entry. Then we have some changes in, or small changes in functions, pretty much related to the lookups. First of all, we have a change in the lookup for the setTempFall. Previously, that there was no lookup for the setTempFall function, simply because in previous versions of Connectit, setTempFall was a unique value across all definitions. So you could not reuse the same temporary value code. However, that's been quite a while that behavior has been changed in the past year and a half, maybe 2 years, where we can reuse the setTempFall. One, we can reuse it across different definitions, but we can also actually reuse it in the same definition. For instance, if we want to loop through data, if we want to add values to a temporary value, then we can reuse the same tempfall code or temporary value code. Let's actually see over here. So here we now have the setTempfall function in use. Previously, this lookup would do nothing when the setTempfall function was selected. Instead, we now simply go to the temporary value list, which is the standard behavior for our parameter fields if we don't have any specific other lookups attached to it, meaning that we can simply select the existing temporary values once again. Of course, as always, please note that we do get a warning if we, or confirmation if we reuse the same code. So we get confronted to make sure that if it really was on purpose that we select the same temporary value code, just to make sure that we didn't accidentally chose that. But of course, if we select yes, we can simply add it once again. And then we have something similar for the get field value and get field value to functions. So these are functions that are used to get a single value from a non-related table or not directly related table in an import or export definition. In this case, it makes most sense to use them in the import definitions. So let's actually take a look at that. There probably are some cases where we already use those functions in the current definitions. Yeah. Here we have some examples already. So if we now have this get field value, of course we have our table number that already had a link to the tables. And if we have selected the table, we can now specify a field from the field list. Instead of going to the temporary values, we can simply directly select the value from the field list that's related to the table number that we just used in the first parameter. Same, of course, with the output field number, or you can have that same list available. We still accept temporary values. Those can always be used and will always be looked up before we actually process the function. But the default lookup, at the very least, goes straight to the fields lookup. And maybe also good to know in this case, the get field value function, in this case, based on the current value, either from a previous function or from the actual field in the import message, use that to look up the value in this table. So if we take a look, that of course is a bit unfortunate that all objects is a bit slow in this container. So let's simply start a new session. But yeah, what it does is based on this table, we use the input field to find a value. In the case of get field value, it always expects one record based on that value. So that could be primary key, for instance. And we output the export field. So in this case, I believe this is in regards to countries, I believe, where we retrieve a value. And unfortunately, it is stuck. Let's actually look it up in the correct context. Okay, not the same, but here we can actually still use the same function. In this case, get field value 2, which I'll explain in a minute what the difference between those is. So here, what we have, for instance, is in the incoming message, we have the AN code. and we want to ultimately write that to the number field on the sales line. However, we want to use that as the item number, but instead we do a lookup at the references based on the value found, and then give back output field number 1, which is the item number in this case. Now the difference between get field value 1 and get field value 2, is get field value without the 2 always expects 1 record and 1 record only. So if we find 0 results in our records in the database, we get an error. If we get multiple records, we also get an error back. Get field value 2 does exactly the same lookups, however, does not give an error back. If it doesn't find anything related to it, it will simply return an empty value. And if it finds multiple records based on that same value, we will get the first record back and the value related to that. Now, in this case, it's apparently the customer template. Right. Okay, so those are the new features. However, I do want to go through the basics of Connectit itself to get an overview as well. If you have any questions in the meantime, of course, you can send them in the questions tab as well. But for now, I want to go through the actual imports and exports details so we know what is currently available in our solution. We already saw the wizard. I do want to make a note of our setup, of course, as well, where we can find the same values. So we have our license key, we have our API that we can select. We have the number series that are generated if you use the setup wizard to initialize Connectit. We have our mapping helper. We do have some logging that we didn't see in the wizard itself. It's good to know that in our import and export process, we try to capture all errors on an import or export entry in itself, so we don't have to stop the full process, but only get the error back for that specific entry. However, in some cases, it is possible that the job queue entries can result in an error as well, resulting in an error on the complete import or export process. However, of course, we want to make sure that we can leave the processing running or restart it whenever possible without waiting for user interaction. Sometimes it might be needed that we need user interaction if there is a persistent error. However, sometimes a process could simply break due to deadlocking, for instance. For those scenarios, we have an option to restart the job queue entry if it enters the error state, and then we will set it to ready, back to ready, and with an earlier starting time for 5 minutes from now, I believe. And besides that automatic restart, we can also specify that we actually want to get an email if that error occurs, so we know that there is an issue that we might need to look at, and from there we can specify our email recipient, so we know where to send the email to, and that will be an email that contains the error message, the call stack, so you can easily see what went wrong. And if there needs to be some user interaction to solve the issue. And of course, we have our default logging level that we by default set it to information for new installations. And we also recommend that for production environments. However, we can set the default and any value that we have here. And if we create new definitions, it will take that default value for those new definitions. Please keep in mind that for every definition, we can specify that logging level as well with a different value, but we at the very least have the default configured there. One thing that I do also want to make clear that we have some beta features enabled or available in Connectit that we can find over here. So currently there are 3 beta features available that might be interesting to check that depending on how well they perform might be included in the standard in new releases. So first of all, we have our internal logging, where it's good to know that previously we had all logging done with the Connectit API to prevent logging on log entries. We decided to send the logging temporarily to the Connectit API, keep that in memory until the process was done, and retrieve all logging entries. However, as you can imagine, if we have a lot of logging, for instance, if we select debug or detailed information, then that results in a lot of logging lines, which results in a lot of API calls to the Connectit API. So we decided to create a better feature for this. If you enable it, we keep the logging internally. We still don't write the logging until the process is completed to the tables. So we keep it in internal memory instead. But that results in much better performance for both large files and for the for both logging levels. So detailed information and debug will be faster than before. So I can really recommend enabling that. We do have an option for the new CSV and Excel export with multiple table relations, where previously for flat files we only allowed for 2 tables. So for instance, the sales header and sales line. But if you wanted to include another table, then it would prevent you from that with an error. And now we have a feature available for that, there where we can expand that as well. So you can use multiple table relations. Technically, there is no limit on how many levels, how many table relations you have. However, please keep in mind it is still flat output for Excel and CSV. So there is a limitation if you want to have multiple arrays or multiple table relations on the same level, where you have a one-to-more relation. So it would be possible, for instance, to have the sales line, and from the sales line go to the item, because that's a one-to-one relation. That's fine. You can also go to the sales line and a level deeper and get something like all related references or unit of measures for that item. That's all fine. However, if you have a sales header, you have the sales lines linked, then you can't have another data item on the same level as the sales line that's also set to an array, because that wouldn't make sense in a flat export. And the third one is the new filter experience. Before this beta feature was introduced, we had our own filter engine or filter process. However, that did not support all standard filter options, with some notable differences. For instance, if we wanted to filter on empty values or empty strings, then we would actually expect a empty value in the filter string instead of the normal single quotes. And if you enable this feature, then we will actually use standard filter options like you would also use in Pages, for instance. And the benefit from that is that, or two benefits actually, is that you can use all standard filter options that are available in Business Central on the definition filters. And there is also a performance improvement due to the way that we can filter those records. Please keep in mind that while these beta features can be very helpful, it is recommended to try them out in a sandbox or test environment first. Now, if we go back to the role center, one thing to note as well here is our help page. You can access it from everywhere within Connectit, of course. If you go to the help and support page, or the help here over here, then we will link it as well in our contact URL. However, you can also directly go from here to our Connectit space in Confluence to get an overview of all the functionality within Connectit. Now, as for the standard functionality, we have split Connectit in import and export definitions. While most of those processes with regards to configuration look the same, there are some notable differences. I always like to start with the export definitions because that's the easiest to explain, and from there we can go back to the import definitions and see all additional options. For this session, I will focus mostly on the definition lines options that are available. So if we check the export definition, I will go over some of the sections in the header as well. So first of all, we have, of course, our general info with the definition number that can be generated with the number series. Or if you set the number series to manual, you can, of course, change it as well. Or set up a related number series as well. That's also possible. We have a description simply for internal usage, and we specify the data format. Now, technically, we allow 4 data formats: JSON, XML, CSV, and Excel. That doesn't mean that those are the only file extensions that are available, but that does determine how the data is generated and stored in a file or in a message. In this case, we have an XML example. Depending on the data format, you might see some different options. So for instance, we have some XML options over here. In this case, we can include a doc type element that was included in the previous major release. And we also have some options for CSV and Excel. If we check the methods over here, we have a list of methods available. We have our manually a method, which simply export it to a file that we can download in the browser. We have an FTP option to download or upload to FTP server, which includes FTP, FTPS, and SFTP. We have the REST method, which technically is simply a web service method. It's not limited to REST APIs. And we have our SOAP web service. That one specifically uses the SOAP service and the WSDL that is used, that we can also import in our Connectit environment. We have Azure Storage, also good to know, by the way. If we select one of those methods, we get also different options for that. So Azure Storage allows us to upload or download a file from the Azure Storage based on a connection string and a container name. We have our service bus, which is an Azure service that allows us to queue messages. And that can be helpful if we need to process data in a specific order, so we can queue those messages in the same queue, and then we can download them from the queue in order as well. We have the event grid, which is a service that allows us to deliver a message to the event grid that can be picked up by multiple applications at the same time, for applications or services that listen to that event grid. From our side, that's only usable in the exports. Then we have the Dropbox option as well, where we can create a Dropbox app within the Dropbox account, which allows us to upload and download files from that specific folder, and the subfolders as well. Then we have the REST endpoints, so that's good to know. Yeah, that's of course the case that currently only allows for JSON. So we have separated REST and REST endpoints. It's good to know that with pretty much all methods, we presume that Connectit initiates the request. So if we have REST selected, we will either push or pull data from an external service. With REST endpoints, we can also receive data using the OData web service from Business Central. We also have an email functionality where we can set up an email task to send out the result in an attachment in an email. And in that email task, we can specify a subject and body for the email as well, and a recipient. We have intercompany, which allows us to send data within Business Central itself to another company. Technically, we could also process it in the same company if we want to, but this allows us to process it in one or multiple companies at the same time. So for instance, if you want to synchronize data between companies, then you can have one master company, for instance, where we manage all that data and then export it to all other companies configured in that intercompany method. And lastly, we have mixed, which is, as the name suggests, a mix of the previously mentioned methods. It's good to know that if we select mix, we will also enable automatically the use endpoints processing rule, which allows us to specify multiple endpoints. We can use multiple endpoints with all other methods as well, but this allows us to use a mix of methods based on endpoints where we have the same configuration options as well. So for instance, once again, back to that synchronization, if you want to synchronize to both a different environment with REST methods and with two other companies with the intercompany method, then you can select multiple endpoints here, generate the data once based on this export definition, and from there export it to those multiple endpoints. If we look at the processing rules here, some notable things that we can see here. Once again, we already discussed the use endpoints. We have an option to save exported system IDs. Those will be linked to the export entry. The default behavior is that we don't store them, but we can do that if we enable this. That might be helpful, for instance, if we want to use web services and need to process the response, but don't have any data directly available in the import or in the response that we want to process in the import definition, or anything, for instance, as a query parameter in the URL for the original request. If we don't have anything for that available to know which records to process the response on, then we can use this in combination with a function to retrieve those system IDs as well. so we can still process the data based on the records that we exported and used in that original request. We have an option to allow empty contents. There are a couple of cases where it might make sense to send out a web service request that does not have a body. If we don't enable this, then we simply stop processing the export if we don't have any content. For instance, if there is nothing in the filter, or if the output conditions result in an empty body. Normally it would stop without an error, and this allows us to continue the process as well. Then we have the maximum number of records per array. If we have the array enabled on the root data item, so on the first data item that we see here, normally we would process everything in this export. So we would include every record that is included in the filter in one single message. However, this allows us to split it up. So for instance, if we have 1,000 records and we specify this as 100, then we will get 10 export messages to keep the message size limited. Then we have the maximum number of retry attempts. As mentioned before, if there is an error on the export or import entry, we try to keep that error on that entry, which means that entry will get the status failed, or the Boolean field will be enabled. With this option, we can specify if Connectit needs to retry it after a failure, or and how many times it is allowed to retry. So for instance, once again, if there are any locking issues that might be temporary, we simply can specify this here. There's also a default value in the setup that you can specify that will be used for all new definitions. Yeah, that in this case allows us to retry it up to 3 times before we finally give up and leave it in an error state. And the last part here is the processing delay, where we specify if there needs to be a delay, and this is specifically for processing records based on our table monitor, where we check for changes in the database. And we might want to wait before we generate the content. So in that case, we will check the record and place it in the export queue, so we know that it needs to be exported. But we set a processing delay in milliseconds to make sure that we don't process it before a certain time and generate the content. For instance, if we post a sales order and we create a sales shipment, or if we create an invoice, anyway, we create a posted document, we might want to have a table monitor on the insert of the sales shipment header or a sales invoice header, for instance. But when we do that, we don't know for certain if the process of posting is completed and everything related to that is already created, for instance, the lines for those posted documents. So instead, we might want to simply wait a while. In this case, this would be 10 seconds. So the record will still be checked to be exported. It will be placed in the export queue. So we know that we need to export it, but only if the record is at the very least 10 seconds within that queue. We will not process it any further, and only after that we will process it to generate the content based on the data items that we have in the definition lines. Recurrence is also a good thing to talk about, and that's the way that the job queue entry checks for the definitions. So the most easy option is to use the recurring job, and this has some options that are similar to what we see in the job queue entry. If we have enabled this and we have enabled the days where it is allowed to run, we can optionally specify a starting time and ending time. If we don't specify these, it will be allowed to run the whole day. And we can specify a number of minutes between runs. If we don't specify this, we will use the frequency of the job queue entry itself. But if you have the job queue entry, for instance, set to 5 minutes, then you can also set it to, for instance, 60 minutes to make sure that this export is only allowed to run every hour. If you have the job queue entry set to 5 minutes and you set this to 2, then please note that the frequency of the job queue entry will still be used, and it will still only try to process this export definition every 5 minutes. In the advanced schedule, we have similar options available, but there are a couple of additional options here as well. Maybe actually check it here. Of course, need to select advanced. And for some reason, we don't get the section visible. Okay. So those advanced recurrence settings normally would allow us to create multiple schedules for a single definition. If you have multiple schedules that can be combined in a single recurring job, then we can specify multiple schedules, and we can also allow for different cycles, like weekly, monthly, or we can even allow a schedule based on a date formula to be calculated. Both of those options will be handled by the job queue entry, by the task scheduler. And from there, it will look at if it is allowed to run based on the last run status. And from there, decide if it is allowed to be executed or not. And then we need to wait for the next execution of the job queue entry. The last part that we see here is the real-time export. And the real-time export is an option that is not using the job queue. Instead, that will skip the part of setting or placing a record in the export queue, but instead would generate the content for the export entry directly when there is a change. So for instance, if we have this on the sales header, we do need to specify a table monitor to use that real-time export. But if we check this for modifications and for a specific field, for instance, once that modification is done, then it will directly generate this content based on the definition lines in that same session, and we'll try to export it directly based on the method that's configured. Now, let's actually take a look at the definition lines. So here we have a couple of options available. First of all, we see that we have a line type where we can specify the data items. So those are the tables. We have the fields, and those are called as the table fields. We have constant values. So those are values that are not directly coming from a table or from a field, and might simply be a constant value or something that's calculated with functions. We have a helper available, as you can see here, as mentioned before, that does the same thing as a data item in the sense of the with regards to the structure. So it uses an indent to create a new node within the message. So here we have a separate shipping address node. However, we don't leave the original table. So here, these fields still look at the sales header. If we try to map those fields, we will see that we have the fields available for the sales header. And then we have two options that are only usable for XML. So we have the namespace declaration. XML can use namespaces. and we have attributes that are only usable for XML as well, where instead of the output being an element, will be an attribute linked to either a node or an element. For the data item and the fields, we can select the table or the field number with their own lookup, of course. Once again, we have the object over here, and we have the field lookups over here. Based on that, we will determine the data type based on the field. Of course, we can change it. For instance, if we have the status over here with an option, we can either set that to integer to get the numeric value, for instance, or the text value to always get the actual text value for that status. And there we can also decide how to handle it, how to export it. This can be very useful for JSON specifically, because with JSON, the way that the data is written in the file or in the message can be different. For instance, with Booleans, that can, if you set those to text value, it will still be true or false or yes or no, but that will be encapsulated with the double quotes. If we set to Boolean, it will actually be a Boolean with true or false in the message. Of course, we have our element names. So these are the elements as we can see them in the export in the message. For the constant value, we can set a fixed value over here. Then we have the functions that we can use on the field and constant values and the attributes. We have a full list of standard functions over here. We have functionality here with integration events where you can add custom functions as well. You can also see that we actually have a custom function here, over here. This is not part of the standard Connectit release. And here we can use functions, multiple functions for the same field, where the first function will use the output for the field, if there is any, and gives the output for that function as input for the next function. So, for instance, what we could do is that this with the function today, which will get the actual date for today. This doesn't require any input, so any input, any field value that was used before will be ignored, but it will have an output of a date, and from there we can, of course, use something like a format function, where we can specify how the date should be formatted. For instance, like this. And in this case, it's also good to check the data type to know that we evaluate against the correct data type. If we don't specify this, we will let Connectit try to decide which data type to evaluate against and try to find the first one that gives any correct result. Optionally, we could, of course, also use the numerical format numbers here. So this would be the XML or system format. And if we leave that, we can see how many functions are used. Same goes for the filters. Difference only is that we use those on the data items. So we have a filter on the data item sales header. If we check these, then we can specify filters based on the fields in the sales header. Here we can use actual values. So in this case, the example is that we only export orders, but we could also specify temporary values as well. What we could do, for instance, is I believe it was this that we previously used. where we can use temporary values if we use those square brackets, for instance, to mention that we want to export everything from order date with that value used in the in this temporary value with a greater or equal than. Then we have the key field numbers, where we can simply set the table relations. So what we have here is the sales line that's linked to document type and document number from the sales header. And then we specify if something is in the output or not. And as you can see, we have excluded these from the output. If we do decide to have the field in the output, we can also specify certain conditions to set the output. For instance, if a value is empty or not empty. And here, of course, we can either compare the current value if we have a field to check, or we can use temporary values as well to check against. And the last part that we see here is the array, and there we specify if we need to get multiple records. So in this case, the sales line, we have the array enabled because we can have multiple sales lines related to the same sales header. If we set the array enabled on the first data item, that just means that we create a one single message for all records within this filter. If we don't enable this, if we leave this disabled, we will create a new message or new file for every new sales header record. As mentioned before, we have the table monitor. If we don't specify, if we don't activate this, we will simply, and we have the recurrence enabled, we will process everything, every record which is within this filter. If we specify this to be enabled, we will only process records that are registered in the export queue through these monitored actions. So for instance, we could monitor insertions, we could monitor modifications, deletions, renames. And in the case if we choose the modifications, we can also specify which fields to include to make sure that we only monitor certain fields, or if we select this, we can specify certain fields to exclude so that we monitor everything except for these fields. If one of these triggers, these monitors is triggered, and we find that we actually do monitor the table and the fields, then we will add the record to the queue to be processed. Next, we have the alerts. We can specify alert recipients to receive an alert if there is an error. We can do that on both a failure and a success. Please make sure to, in the case of email, to add a valid recipient and set it to active to allow it to work, and we can specify multiple alert rules as well. Then we have the logging part. As mentioned before, we have our details, our default logging level. That's set to information in this case, but we can specify for each definition as well if we need to do something different. And we can also select if we want to log the body so that we can look back after the export or import process has been completed. And then we have the project where we can specify if we want to manage this definition as part of a project, which is mostly used for administrative purposes. For instance, we have the option over here in the definitions for both import and export to export the definition configuration, where we create a JSON, or we can do the same to the archive, where we set that same configuration to an internal record. That same thing can be done on a project as well, so that we can group some definitions together. Now, if we take a quick look at the import side of things, let's actually take that other one. So a lot of this is the same as on the export side. We have the same data formats, we have the same methods available. We have some different processing rules. In this case, we only have the maximum number of retry attempts. We have the same recurrence options with the difference that we don't have a real-time option over here. However, the biggest difference is in how we handle the lines. First of all, what we see is we have two separate sections over here for the definition lines and the constant values. So we don't have any constant values over here available because those are not part of the message. So the definition lines are where we configure how the import message looks like, and the constant values is where we specify field values that are not coming from the import message or not directly from the import message. We can also use temporary values to store data temporarily and make sure that we process the field after a certain part of the message has been completed. So we can also specify it to process it before or after a specific field in the definition lines. Now, a couple of things in the definition lines are the same as on the export side. The order of the columns is a bit different. For instance, we have the external property name, which is the element name or the tag name from the export side, which we can see here. We have the line types available, as mentioned before, the same line types except for the constant value. Once again, for data items and for fields, we can specify the table or field number. And we can specify if functions need to be executed for those fields. And if there are filters that need to be checked for the data items, or the helpers in this case as well. Biggest difference with the filters in this case is that we don't filter the tables, but we filter the incoming message. So here we can actually specify what field to filter on the incoming side. And then we have some options that are specifically for import only. So we have that external identifier available where we can specify if we want to check this external identifier based on this incoming fields. So in this case, the ID. If that already exists, then we will, if we have already imported that before and have specified that external identifier in the imported records, then we will try to update the record, or at the very least process the record exist action. In this case, it is an update, but that can also be a different action. If we don't find the external identifier as before mentioned before, we will check the primary key values. And once again, if we find the record based on the primary keys, we will still use the record exist action, or we will, if we don't find it at all, we will create a new record or execute this action. We can also just skip it to make sure that we only update existing records. In the case of the existing record, we can also skip it if we only want to create new records, or we can actually delete it or recreate it or create a duplicate. And something similar is also available in the case of the update. If we want to process the field exist. So if we have a field, we can specify in an update what to do. If we do say do nothing, this field will only be processed for new records. If we specify update, it will actually update with the new value. If we don't specify any value here, we'll actually also update it. So please keep in mind that update is the default action that we do here. So in this case, we have simply specified that regardless of whether the order date or the reference are changed in an update message, we will ignore it and simply only import it once for new purchase orders. We have an option over here for mandatory. If you specify that a certain part is mandatory for processing, then we can simply select it like this. Make sure that we get an error if this field is not available. So that's important. If we don't specify this, we allow this field not to be present in the message. Then we have the validate and the run trigger. The first part is the onValidate trigger on the field, the table field. And the second part is the onInsert or onModify trigger for the table itself that can be executed. So for instance, if we have the order date, we can specify that we want to validate that. And we could also run the onModify trigger in this case for the table after this value has been filled in the record. With constant values, we see pretty much the same options. Of course, we have the fixed value for the constant value that we can use, but we also have the functions variable. As mentioned before, we specify when to process this constant value. Primary keys will always be processed first. That's why you don't see it for those other three records. But with non-primary key fields, we can specify when to update it. Standard action is after key, so after all primary key fields are processed. But we can specify it to process before a certain field, after a certain field, or as a last field in the table. Once again, we have our validate and run triggers and our field access options as well over here. One thing that we don't see over here is actually how the tables are linked, and that's because that's in a separate page over here in the key links. So here we can specify the parent and child relations. In this case, with the purchase header, document type, and document number, with the purchase line. We can also specify which to process first. For primary key fields, it makes sense to always leave this on parent. But if, for instance, we want to process the vendor in this case as well, we could have something like this, the buy from vendor, and then we need to select it like this. And then we could do something like this, where we specify that that we process the vendor record first if it doesn't exist, to make sure that we have the vendor available. And after we have this vendor created, then we'll enter the buy from vendor number and validate it as well, to make sure that we can validate it from the vendor record without an error. As mentioned before, the same options for the backup are as well over here. So those can also be used over here, and we have the same options as well available here for the alerts, for the logging, and for the assigning of the project. So those are pretty much the highlights of how the Connectit definitions are structured. If there are any questions for now, please leave them in the question tab. So if you have any questions later on, you can, of course, send them to sales@idyn.nl for more information. So thank you for joining.